need to start like a Patreon or some type of GoFund. Bring Kenny back.
He killed Kenny.
Yeah. We gotta bring him back. Before I open up the lines right now, why is UFC? Let me ask you this, Milcar. Why is UFC doing far better than boxing? This is something that been rolling into the Leaving the Ring Gmail. Folks are like, what's going on? I mean, how are they able to muster up a better fight card, better fighters to step in the octagon? They have pay-per-view ready. They got their fans excited, and we're kind of stuck with the shuffle of prospects and other guys that they're trying to build up their name. But the elite guys are sitting out saying they're not stepping in there until later or the money's got to be right.
I think it really boils down to the fact that the UFC is a highly exploitative monopoly that underpays its fighters and who can control their careers a lot more than a boxing promoter can. Because guess what? A boxing promoter has rival promoters. Boxers have more options, and boxers are far better paid than UFC fighters. So, just on the financial standpoint, if you are a top UFC guy, you're making a few $100,000 a fight. If you are a top boxer, you're making 7 or 8 figures. You can afford to sit out for a little during Corona. I mean, look at the stars of the sport. Triple G, Canelo, Anthony Joshua, the list goes on. Tyson Fury. Each and every one of these guys can afford to retire right now. The top UFC guys, they're not. A lot of them are not millionaires. They have to fight to earn a living. So if they're told, let's show up in 2 weeks or 2 months and you'll get this little paycheck, they're going to be more inclined to do it than a boxer would.
Absolutely. The talks of kudos to these UFC fighters because they're risking their lives. They're willing to put their lives on, even with the COVID-19. They're showing they have bigger cojones than boxers. Well, I mean, if you're only, like you said, it's a monopoly with the UFC. So Dana really has the last word. How many of these guys have you seen, these UFC guys really? I mean, they're starting to stand up, but really make a stand to him and say, no, I'm not doing this. If they do, they have this strong following now, like a Conor McGregor. But even him, he still took knee to him, to Dana White, when Dana said, you need to jump.
Yeah, but I mean, to me, it's not even an issue of one being tougher than the other. I don't think that the person who's bagging my groceries at the supermarket is any tougher than me. But during this whole COVID-19, I'm a teacher. I got to work from home and be safe in here and teach my classes online. Whereas the guys that I see every time I go grocery shopping, they didn't have the luxury of doing that. They had to go to work and put themselves at much more risk than I did. So for me, it's really just an issue of, but even the mid-level guys in boxing get paid far more than the top-level guys, other than McGregor and maybe a couple others in the UFC. I mean, there used to be a pretty simple formula. If a boxer sold, 500,000 pay-per-views, he made 7 figures. If he sold, 1 million pay-per-views, he's making 8 figures. If he's selling high into the multiple millions, so 2 or 3 million, he might even be touching 9 figures, aka like you just look at Pacquiao and Mayweather. They would have UFC shows that were generating $1.5 million plus buys, where the UFC guys are making a few $100,000 in main events. It's just a far more exploitative system. And like you said, David, the guys have far fewer options and are more likely to jump when they're being told to than a boxer would.
Yeah, and that's, look, I think what a lot of folks don't even understand, too, that a fighter life it's very isolated. I don't care for MMA or any athlete, honestly, very isolated. They really don't have that interactive relationship with the outside world because their life is consumed with training, looking for the right regimens, resting, eating correctly. It's a rollout. And if a UFC fighter is trying to make ends meet, Dana White says this is what's going to happen. You're going to fight at the Fight Island, or you're going to fight at the New York, or whatever the case, wherever the spot they decide to make. They have to, because of contract, go forward with that. There is no like, well, I don't want to do that. I don't want to risk my life. I don't want to, blah, 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 because it's really up to Dana. He's the one that's able to move the pawns on the chessboard, whereas in boxing, it's completely different. Boxers have a kind of more, not more, but a whole lot more leg room when it comes to making decisions with their careers. Not the ones that are trying to make a name for themselves, but our elite fighters, they certainly do. They're able to say, like, no, I don't want to do that because of the high pay they are receiving. Now, is that a bad thing for boxing? Yeah, for us boxing fans, but it certainly isn't for the fighters themselves. Whereas UFC, they are bounded by contract from the UFC and Dana White to step into that cage when they're told to. So,
well, you just heard Clay say it himself. I mean, I asked him very directly, do you guys rely on the win bonuses? And he said yes.
Yeah.
I mean, boxers don't rely on win bonuses. Boxers get a purse. They show up, they get paid. UFC fighters get a purse. They need to win to earn a decent wage for their work. So it's a totally different level of pay and exploitation.
And some folks would say, like, how did this happen? Like, how is that UFC and Dana White and all the other guys that are involved in this able to draw this up and get people to sign this? Well, it's a new sport. It hasn't been around as long as boxing. Boxing has been around much longer. So, let me put it this way: if Bob Arum, Al Heyman, Oscar De La Hoya, any of these guys you mentioned right now, Eddie Hearn, Matchroom, if they can monopolize this sport, they would do it. And they've tried. Yeah. Have they not? They've tried. The thing is that Dana came in on the right time, the right era of saying, hey, this is a new sport. Let's see what we could do with it, because the guys that created it, which was the Gracies, obviously they couldn't take it to that next step. Couldn't take it to that next level. It had kind of died and fizzled out, if you remember, in the early 90s. And Dana was like, hey, no, wait, we could do something with it. So they were able to put a stamp on it, and they were smart enough to not allow other organizations to build a strong following, to create this massive buzz that UFC had. So they decided to buy out, like, Pride, that you had mentioned to me, Amilcar, earlier, and Strikeforce. They went in and swooped it. They're like,
here's my other question. If the UFC is so great, well, weren't we hearing all last year that Dana White was getting into boxing? Didn't we hear that he was going to have a big announcement in, like, what was it, September? Then it was October. Then nothing happened. Well, if they're so good and they're so great when it comes to their business, why haven't they come in and run their boxing shows? What's stopping them from doing that? Where are their boxing cards? Right? If the UFC is so great, why aren't we seeing boxing cards being run by the UFC? Didn't Dana say he was going to get into the sport late last year?
Oh, he's been saying that for so long. I think Dana, it's like, what it reminds me of is like when Manny Pacquiao was Manny and Floyd Mayweather at the top of their career, every fighter wanted to attach their name. I remember Gennady Golovkin would mention Floyd. I remember Sergio Martinez would mention Floyd and Pacquiao. And I think that's what Dana does. He likes to attach his name to boxing because regardless of how they think of boxing as an old head sport, truth of the matter is it's a world sport. In a lot of countries, there's only 3 major sports, and boxing is one of them. It is a niche sport here in the States, but go anywhere else. Boxing is a very high-profile sport to a lot of folks. It carries the backs. It carries on their back countries. There's a country
and let's be
pride
honest,
out of it.
There's also a very big kind of racial divide
Yes.
between the demographics that follow boxing and that follow UFC. The UFC, are more. I don't want to get too political here, but let me just say that a lot of the people that watch UFC are calling for walls to go up, and a lot of people that watch boxing are the descendants of immigrants or immigrants themselves. You look at the different groups of people that are watching the younger fighters coming into the sport of boxing. Tank Davis has a huge following. There's no Tank Davis in the UFC.
No.
You talked about Ryan Garcia. He's got a huge following.
Right.
There's no Ryan Garcia in the UFC. And even if you talk about overseas in MMA, MMA is kind of big in Japan, but it's not as big as boxing is. There's no MMA fighter in Japan that's as big as the monster Inoue. It's just totally different, and it always frustrates me when people try to compare it. They're two different sports. They've got two different fan followings. They're marketed and they're promoted and they're organized in two totally different ways. And it's when I hear about boxing fans, longing for the UFC. Trust me, you wouldn't want boxing being run like the UFC.
You wouldn't. You absolutely wouldn't. I mean, I think that the UFC is doing. I think the UFC has done a great job in some parts of what they do, or else they wouldn't be where they're at. There is no knocking what they have accomplished and what they could do. But as to sit back and say, what are they doing right and what is boxing doing wrong that we're not getting these fights immediately? Well, you have to look deeper of what what has been rolled out as a plan or contract among fighters. I mean, look, I saw numerous people applauding and congratulating Masvidal, who had I don't follow UFC that much, but I think it was like 6 weeks out or less when he decided to get into the ring with Usman, right? Is that his name? And
I didn't see the fight.
I didn't see it either. Right? I didn't see it either.
I don't even know who won. Yeah, but full disclosure.
But Masvidal lost the fight. They went to distance, and he clearly looked. I saw the highlights. I didn't watch the fight, but I watched the highlights. He clearly looked gassed. He looked out of shape, and there was a lot of boxing people that were like, before the fight happened, saying like, see, this is what fighters need. Don't need that full camp that they're asking for, or these guys are showing these UFC guys are showing true balls, true grit. Oh my God! But then when we saw Masvidal, who did that, he jumped in there. He jumped at the chance of beating the champion because it would only up his credibility and his stat. You sit back and you watch his highlights and you saw the performance. You wonder, was it such a great idea? Do fighters, boxers, understand the conditioning is pretty much the add-on to a win? That helps you get to win. If you're for preparation.
That's a good point because it's linked to something that we discussed previously, which was people not wanting to fight Canelo. And I actually saw an interview last week with Billy Joe Saunders where he made a lot of sense to me, at least, which is that he doesn't want to take a Canelo fight if he doesn't have the kind of training camp that he needs. And he said he'd never really be able to live with himself if he took a fight for just the money without training appropriately and then lost. He's like, look, I have no problems losing to Canelo. People lose to better people, but I don't want to lose to Canelo because I didn't have a good training camp and then always having that kind of at the back of my mind. And then he also was just talking about they were essentially using his name, which I think is true because, as he put it, look at the guys that are talking about Canelo fighting now. None of them are up to the level of a Billy Joe Saunders. So if they're offering those guys the kind of money that they're offering Billy Joe Saunders, it meant that they were never really offering Billy Joe Saunders much in the way of a serious offer. And look, I don't know the whole story, but his argument seemed to make a lot of sense, at least to me. And like you said, you need a good fight camp and a good training if you're going to have a good performance in the fight.
You do. And you know what, for folks to say, well, he's been training, he's been getting, Masvidal, he's been training, he's ready, this is what fighters should be doing all the time. And then you see the guy, and I was like, man, I thought this guy was a little bit more cut up. I'll go back and look at his last fight. He's pretty cut up. And here he looks a little flabby. He's got a little bit of a little beer belly there. He doesn't seem that aggressive. He's not letting his hands go as much. You could see there was something off with the kid. And then I go, well, this is why some fighters, elite fighters, are saying, hey, I need more time, especially if there's money on the line. I mean, a lot of money on the line, And
I understand that.
And I think sometimes we jump this gun of like, we want to see our fighters get in there. We want to do this, but now we're not taking the account of what's going on. Things are shut down. Gyms are shut down. There's social distancing. Some places are worse off than others. As fans, we're asking for these guys to kind of put a rush into what they would normally, if they had a normal camp. And that's the thing. It's got to be a normal camp. How many things would they want to have to exclude out of that regular training camp that they would have done a year ago, where they have to now adapt to now because they can't do certain things for certain reasons? It might be closed or it's not available for you at that time. So, as frustrated as I am with the fight fans, because that's what I am first. I'm a fight fan first before I'm leaving in the ring. I have to look at like, well, shit. I can't judge them because only they know. Only they know. And a lot of them have mentioned Kovila, and I've said Kovila looked drained.
Well, look what happened to him. And look, any fight fan knows, a serious fight fan, that level of a championship fight requires at least an 8-week training camp.
Right.
So for him to be offered a fight now, and I said minimum, by the way. See, the play here is Canelo's already been in training camp, so he starts his training camp, and then a few weeks in, he gives a lowball offer to a top fighter, knowing that he won't take it, so that now when he eats up on whatever lower level guy he's going to sign the fight, he doesn't look so bad, because it's like